Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We are talking fantasy baseball. My name is Eric Henriksen alongside Josh Day, and it's a great day to be with you, chit chatting our way to fantasy baseball championships. Now, we've just gotten started. The season is underway. We are officially out of spring training. And so, on today's show, we're going to talk about some opening weekend highlights. We're going to talk about some interesting spring training developments, such as Christian Campbell making the opening day roster for the Red Sox, Hayden Birdsong not making the rotation, and some other interesting roster situations that we've seen so far. But Josh, first, I have to ask you, because we talked about cramming for our draft last Sunday, how did the draft go for you? Because I could say for me, it went okay. How'd it go for you? Did you have a plan? Did you execute that plan? Did you get derailed real quick? What happened? Tell us about it.
Yeah. It was the draft for our 10-team Yahoo League, daily head-to-head, and it's a keeper league, so this experience is unique to our league. So it's not like a redraft or strategies like that. But I think in some ways with keeper leagues, what's interesting is that you kind of know part of your lineup, so then it's easier to kind of like target, make targets of what your lineup needs. So with that in mind, I really needed first base and third base, which actually made me draft Vlad Jr. I think I was the third pick. So I reached from a bit, but first base was just so thin. I knew I'd be lucky to get Alonso with the second pick. A lot to be desired, I would say, after the Pete Alonso pick. So I just felt it was paramount to reach for Vlad there, and then I would have that would give me options because Vlad is first base and third base eligible. So I knew if I picked Vlad, I could at least have him at first. But if Devers and Machado weren't there in the second pick, then I could grab, potentially grab Alonso. So that was basically my core strategy. I went with Devers, which now I'm a little nervous about, given his very, very rocky start, but it's only 2 games and it's a very long season, so we shall see.
Last week we played a game where we compared the players in the no-name game. We had Matt Olson and Pete Alonso ended up being the two names. Now, Matt Olson is a keeper in this league, so that's why you don't hear Josh talking about Matt Olson as a
Right.
pick
Yep.
possibility. And I will say I was in a very similar position. I also needed first base and third base, so you and I were going into very similar
Yep.
strategy in in the beginning there.
I clocked that.
My my goal was to draft Bryce Harper
Yep.
and pick a third baseman either on the next turn, and if none of them were there, I was going to wait for Bregman.
Uh,
But it turns out that Kyle Tucker fell to me, and I just
yep.
couldn't pass up Kyle Tucker. So I took Tucker with my first pick, and then coming back around, I was picking seventh. Coming back around, I picked Pete Alonso to shore up first space, and then somehow Manny Machado made it to me
Yeah,
in the third round, and
that was great.
I couldn't pass it up. It's the value was just too good. So whereas I
Mhm.
could have waited for Bregman, I just thought Machado's just probably a guarantee for more counting stats across the board and possibly a slightly higher batting average. And I kind of like the team he plays on a little bit better, but perhaps that's just the Yankee hat you're wearing screaming back at me. Don't you dare talk well about any Red Sox. So yeah, I mean, overall, the draft went well for me. Overall, are you happy with your team? I mean, it is a long season. You're going to turn over, a good 40 to 50% of your roster, but are you happy with how it went?
Yeah, I think I had a lot of early picks based on off-season trades. So yeah, I'm just sitting tight, seeing what happens. On paper, it should be a contending team, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Long season, as we talked about in our very first episode. I don't think your championship odds are made or broken during the draft. You just set up your foundation during the draft, and then it's up to you over the next 6 months to manage your team and make the right moves and fill in the gaps where and when you have them. But with that, draft season's over, man. Season started.
Yep.
We're in those 6 months. We're just, a couple days in, but we're in those 6 months. So with that, let's talk about some opening day highlights.
Do it.
So Josh, first up we have Austin Wells it was announced about a week to go in spring training that Austin Wells would hit leadoff for the Yankees, especially against right-handed pitching. And what does he do in his very first at bat? But homer, and he becomes the first Yankee to do so, to hit a leadoff home run on opening day. Can you believe that? Out of all the players that have played for the Yankees, Austin Wells is now the answer to a trivia question. But what do you see, what do you see out of Austin Wells and the possibilities of him leading off for the New York Yankees? And I would say, coming off of a pretty decent rookie season.
Well, I will point out that his home run was the very definition of a Yankee Stadium homer.
Yes, it was.
It was like only a home run in the Yankee Stadium out of all major league hitting parks. So I will add that caveat. That said, I do think that his solid walk rate could keep him batting high in the lineup, and his above average fly ball rate could lead him down the path to 20 home runs. But yeah, his biggest question though is, can he improve his splits against lefties? So I guess we'll see.
My biggest gripe with Austin Wells is that if that pitch is, anywhere from his belt and above, he's gonna swing and miss hit it. So I don't care
Yeah.
if it's from a righty or a lefty. That man cannot hit anything above the belt, and I hope that he improves that. I know the pitchers like pitching to him, so he's got his defensive responsibilities down, and I think now he's just got to get hopefully catch up to fastballs a little bit better when they are up there, because I know they do look like beach balls. But yeah, I think he's an interesting guy to keep an eye on, I would say, right? Because he's not a top 10, top 12 catcher right now, but he very well could be, come 3 weeks from now. Or
What do you think? Yeah, hitting at the top of that lineup. What do you think his end of season numbers look like?
oh man, okay, so let's go with improvements across the board in the numbers. I will say if he consistently bats leadoff, let's go with 80 runs, and I say 80 because
Wow,
he's not gonna hit leadoff against lefties. We already know that.
that's true.
So I'm gonna say 80 runs. Let's go 18 home runs and 63 RBIs, 240 batting average, but an on base percentage. So if you play in an OBP league, let's go 370 on base percentage, which is actually really good. But I'm
Yeah,
looking at improvement across the board for him.
I'd buy that.
That's a catcher that you're going to pick up at some point off the waiver wire and could become your starting catcher.
Hey, he already was in our 12-team league.
Yeah, look at that. Now, going to a catcher's battery mate, not Austin Wells's particular battery mate, but moving just 60 feet 6 inches up the diamond to the pitcher's mound. Another opening day highlight for me, and I'm sure for everyone around baseball, was Mackenzie Gore, former top prospect, hasn't found a tremendous amount of success in the majors yet. Comes out absolutely firing. 6 innings, 13 Ks, 1 hit. Josh, what do you think about Mackenzie Gore?
I mean, what a way to start the season. Perhaps the greatest opening day performance. Look, the
Very
talent-
possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the talent has been there, and he's shown us his upside in previous seasons. So I think we've all kind of been waiting with this last season. It was, he was kind of up and down. I think the first part of the season, it was bookend. He bookended his season with like great performance, and then it was a kind of a slump, which I think was explained by an injury.
Well, that's the
But
thing with him, right? Like, he's consistently had injury issues.
I believe so. I mean, I think consistency is the key word for him. The question with Gore remains: can he throw more strikes consistently? In the past, his command comes and goes. And I believe this offseason he added a new slider to his arsenal, which could play a part in stabilizing his numbers. But again, that remains to be seen. Nevertheless, it was certainly a very encouraging first start, and against the Phillies, no less. So I would say if he's on your wire, like, immediately stop listening to this and go pick him up.
And then come back and
'Cause-
keep listening.
Well, right, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. That was one of the most impressive opening day performances I think I've ever seen. So good, in fact, that his FIP and XFIP are negative numbers. Now I get it; it's 6 innings, but
Yes.
but he's owed runs at this point, which is amazing. He had 20 swinging strikes. 20. That's amazing. Yeah, he had a CSW percentage of 39%. That's called strikes plus whiffs. 39% is elite. 40% whiff percentage. That's elite. Like, this
Mhm.
was the most dominant pitching performance you possibly could have asked for on opening day, other than a perfect game. Like, this was just
Right.
amazing. So, Mackenzie Gore, like Josh said, if he's out there, go and pick him up, see what happens. He could turn back into a pumpkin in his next game, but he might not. He may have figured it out. Again, this is a former top prospect we're talking about.
Yep.
And another top prospect. Now we're going into the batter's box for this one. Kyle Manzardo, the DH for the Guardians, had a massive opening day. 3 for 4 with a home run and 4 RBIs, 2 runs scored. Josh, Kyle Manzardo had a very, very, very hot spring. We talked about him on this podcast.
Mhm.
Now, it translated at least in the first game. What do you think about Manzardo?
Well, I think you're burying the lead in that he was a single short of the cycle, in
Ah,
that game.
I dug that one deep. Really buried it.
Uh, no, yeah, another, incredible performance. I think there's a lot of post-hype appeal with Manzardo. As you said, he has prospect pedigree. And while last season he didn't exactly set the world on fire, hitting 234 with not a whole lot of pop, which is what you want. You definitely want pop from your DH first base. However, he did show signs of life in the postseason, and most certainly this spring. I believe the home run he hit on opening day was off a lefty, which might be a good sign considering the Guardians have been hesitant on using him against same-handed pitching.
I would say that's a great sign, and it was 106 miles an hour off the bat, so it wasn't a
Yeah,
cheapie.
I think we're gonna get into another interesting first baseman here, and actually, there's a trio of first basemen right now that are really catching the eyes of managers, I believe, and that is Manzardo, Spencer Torkelson, and Soderstrom of the Athletics. And I think it's really interesting because as you talked about earlier with our how our drafts went, and we're talking about the importance of picking a first baseman. I think it's really important, and will be interesting to see some of these younger class of first basemen taking steps forward because it's a position that desperately needs that. So,
I agree.
very very encouraging across the board.
Those are 3 very interesting names that you mentioned. Kyle Manzardo, of course, Spencer Torkelson, who we'll get to in a little bit, and then Tyler Soderstrom, who I didn't plan to talk about today, but I think might be the most curious out of the 3 of them because he'll possibly gain catcher eligibility, so he'll be
Yeah,
catcher and first base eligible. And who knows how that ballpark in Sacramento is going to play.
exactly.
So Soderstrom, another top prospect, former top prospect, who's kind of lost the sheen. But yeah, we'll talk about Spencer Torkelson, like I said, in a little bit, and maybe we'll talk about if Soderstrom is keeping it up in April. We'll talk about him a little later. But yeah, Manzardo, keep your eye on this trio of first basemen. Like you said, it's a shallow position. And maybe this is the year it becomes not so shallow anymore. We're talking the young guys today.
Yeah.
So something coming out of spring training, a lot of what grabs our attention is what happens with younger players, right? Because we're trying to see who's the next best thing in fantasy. Where can I get the value for guys that don't cost that much? So when we come back, we're going to talk about interesting spring training developments. We're going to talk about Christian Campbell, Hayden Birdsong, and we're going to ride the post-hype sleeper train. Christian Campbell was a very buzzy name coming out of spring training. Won the minor league player of the year last year. We've talked about him and his minor league Red Sox teammates on the podcast, Marcelo Meyer, Roman Anthony. Only one of them made the roster. That's Christian Campbell. I would call him a super utility because he can play second, short, third, out. He can play basically anywhere on the diamond. So he makes the Red Sox after a fairly abysmal spring, and he hits 6th on opening day. So he's in the lineup too. Josh, tell me about Christian Campbell.
Yeah, I mean, the Red Sox really seem to believe in this kid, and I think with good reason. Last season in the minors, he hit a combined .330 with 20 homers and 24 steals. So very tantalizing for fantasy purposes. Campbell really has no obvious weaknesses at the plate. I know he didn't have a great spring, but there should be grace with all rookies that jump from, the minors to the majors to have a little time to adjust to major league pitching. And actually, in the first couple of games, he's actually been getting on base. He's hitting, and more so than veterans in front of him. um, so he's doing something. I do think the downside with Campbell is that uh, it may not be come with his bat, but with his glove. He's not the best defender. So my question would be what kind of patience the Sox will exercise with him when they have a bunch of proven guys like David Hamilton that they can fill in if he struggles defensively. He's not like one of those, talented players that can play defense and offense. And when his offense is struggling, he has the defense to fall back on. So I would say if he starts making gaffes, there's potential he could lose playing time. He might lose some at bats late in games for defensive replacement. So we'll see. And as you said, the Red Sox also have a lot of talent waiting in the wings, like Roman Anthony, Marcelo Meyer, that could come up and replace him if he struggles. But for now, he's got the job, and hopefully it sticks.
Playing time matters. Having the job matters. Now, here's a guy who didn't get the job that everyone thought he was going to get after having an amazing spring training, 12 innings pitched, 18 strikeouts, no walks, and that's Hayden Birdsong of your San Francisco Giants. He had a big spring, showed huge control gains, like I just said, but he did not make the starting rotation, surprisingly.
No, he didn't. And it was looking like he was, as you said, he had a very superlative spring training. However, during his final spring start, he cracked a fingernail and now is relegated to the bullpen to start the season. Given the context of the Giants' rotation, given the age, the injury history of the pitchers like Verlander,
42,
Jordan Hicks,
injury.
I think it's easy to see a scenario where he finds his way into the rotation at some point this season. So he should definitely remain on fantasy radars as he has shown his upside. Last season, Birdsong struck out 28% of the batters he faced, but he also walked 14%. So if he can cut down those walks as he did in spring training this season, he could absolutely become a must-start fantasy pitcher.
Yeah, keep an eye on him for now. Keep him on your watch lists as a free agent because, again, he does not have a rotation spot. He's supposed to be the long man out of the bullpen. So even if you play in a saves plus holds league, not really going to have any value right now. He should be top priority on your watch list, I think, should he get a chance to start. And his bullpen performances back up what he's done in the spring. So just don't blindly add him if you see the control issues coming back out of the bullpen. But what? Wait, what? Do you hear that? Do you hear that? I believe that is that's the train leaving the station. Oh. It is the post-hype sleeper train. We're talking young guys today. They're riding that train. They're leaving the station, man. There's a few guys I think that are very interesting riding that train. We're gonna start in New York. First up is Brett Baty, who made the team out of spring training for the New York Mets. Right now, he only has third base eligibility on Yahoo, but he did sort of win the starting second base job right now with Jeff McNeil out. He was a big-time prospect coming up. I know you were really into him when he first got the call because he did play a shallow position in third base. Third base has since gotten deeper, but second base is still shallow. So what do you see out of Brett Baty? What do you think there's a possibility he becomes relevant in shallower mixed leagues?
I suppose so. I kind of soured on him over the past couple of seasons because I'm not sure he knows what he truly is, what he wants to be. He has power, but he drives the ball into the ground and doesn't seem to want to lift the ball. It kind of leaves with underwhelming counting stats. Also, he's been platooned, so I think this is very much a wait and see how much playing time he gets. Does what he did in the spring translate to, the regular season? We'll see. Now, if he somehow can unlock his power in the way of home runs and counting stats and regular playing time, that would be a very attractive second baseman for sure.
Brett Beatty might be the first stop on the sleeper train to get off because I'm not sure with again his penchant for hitting the ball into the ground, kind of like Ke'Bryan Hayes. Would you would
Hmm.
you comp him to Ke'Bryan Hayes? Do you think that's a good comp?
I think it could be. Again, I think he's had split issues and has been kind of jerked around with playing time. So again, that's what I mean. It's hard to say who he is just because he hasn't been given the longest of a leash. But yeah, I guess that could be an outcome. Brian Hayes esque.
Which in the type of leagues we play in, the ones that we're experts in, Brian Hayes is oh my god, I need an injury replacement for 2 seconds, and I don't
Yeah.
have time to find somebody else kind of pick up. So moving on, next up, let's talk about Gavin Williams. Gavin Williams had a massive spring. You'd want to talk about Mackenzie Gore firing an incredible opening day start with 20 swinging strikes. You want to talk about Gavin Williams had just about the same kind of spring.
Yep.
He was bad last year. That was because his early on in the year, and this is why we said during draft season, maybe don't invest in injured pitchers. He was hurt last year. He had an elbow thing. It wasn't feeling good. And when a pitcher's elbow doesn't feel good, they generally don't pitch good. So this year, though, he's fully healthy. He came into spring and just dominated. So what did you see from Gavin Williams this spring? And I believe he starts, as we're recording this on Saturday, March 29th, he starts today.
Oh, exciting. Yeah, in spring, apparently, he came to spring with news that he had further developed his slider and cutter this offseason. But oddly enough, in spring, he leaned mostly on his heater to do all of that damage. So, again, a lot of questions, a lot of excitement, a lot of questions. And I think that's the theme with these guys is, there's no sure shot, but there's upside. So that's why we're talking about them. And I'm curious to see if he can unlock, that 25% plus strikeout potential. But does that come with his problematic walk rate that he's shown in the past?
Guys like Gavin Williams, often they come up to the majors. So you have guys that have a better batting eye. They don't swing at those just off the corner. And so you do tend to see that walk rate go up a little bit. And then, it takes them time to adjust their pitch selection, their
Hmm.
sequencing, their location. But it just takes some time to adjust to the batting eye a little bit of major league hitters. Now, one guy who has had control issues is Jack Leiter, who's next up on the post-type sleeper chain. Jack Leiter, former top pick in the draft, I believe in 2021 for the Texas Rangers.
Pitched last night.
Pitched last night, made the team as the fifth starter. Somehow is pitching in game 2, though. I guess it's just a weird way how things line up at a spring training, another quirk. But he made the rotation. He pitched against Boston, and he pitched quite well.
Yeah, he pitched 5 innings, 4 Ks, 1 walk, 5 hits, 1 earned run. So yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good first start. I think there's a lot of strikeout potential with Leiter, but there's clear demotion risk, and also start to start ratio risk that can lead to probably miserable fantasy experiences.
Yep.
But there's also breakout upside if he can improve his command, which he seemed to do last night with only 1 walk.
Yeah, he's a bit of a wild card, I think, in my opinion. You think about Robbie Ray when Robbie Ray first broke into the majors, high walk rate, high strikeout rate. I think Jack Leiter is very similar in that way. But perhaps we're seeing the ability to command a little bit quicker than we saw with Robbie Ray. And don't put any disrespect on Robbie Ray's name. That man won a Cy Young Award. Okay. So it just took him time. Not progression for every pitcher isn't linear. and it's not
Mm-mm.
as quick. But that doesn't mean that he won't eventually get there. Same thing with Gavin Williams and same thing with Jack Leiter. So, yeah, hey, uh, take a chance. He might be matchup dependent early in the year. What do you think?
I suppose so, but this was against the Red Sox, so he seemed to fare pretty well. To me, he would be if you have some interest in him, pick him up. But I think, like for me, he would just sit on my bench for a couple starts just to see how he does over in the early goings of the season, just to protect my ratios unless they were already blown out and I had nothing to lose. But yeah, I think either wait and see.
Yeah. What do you think whip wise? Just whip. What do you think his whip could be this season? Because I think that's his most damaging stat potentially, and that's hard to recover.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's not gonna help you in the whip department. It could be definitely in the 130s, you know? I don't think it's gonna get lower than that. It was a good first game, but again, I'd need to see maybe like a month's worth of starts to really kind of get clear signal on what he's gonna be this season, or at least to start the season.
Yeah, give the league a chance to catch up to any changes that he's made, I'd say, right?
Exactly.
That goes for Gavin Williams as well. But moving on to another guy, a consensus can't miss hitter who very much swung and missed a lot last year. And that's Jackson Holiday, who, let's put it this way, did not have the season, the rookie year that everyone thought he was going to have. Everyone thought he was going to be a runaway rookie of the year. Comes out and is quite abysmal. I think his strikeout rate was up near 50%. But so far, so good to start the season. Maybe a mixed bag. Josh, I know you're a Jackson Holiday investor in our Keep Forever 12-team league. What do you think so far? I know it's just a couple games, but he had a decent spring.
Yeah, well, I was psyched to see him last night go 2 for 3 with a solo homer that went 425 feet. So against Kevin Gossman, so that was very encouraging. I believe he had a couple of maybe one hit in the first game. So he's hitting the ball. He's still striking out some. Look, he's considered one of the best prospects in baseball coming into the last season. But as you said, he really did not live up to expectations, mostly due to his poor contact and high K rates. This spring, he seemingly showed an improved K rate, but I guess we'll see if that translates to the regular season. I think he's for sure a hold in dynasty and keeper leagues. I would not sell on him at this moment. But in redraft, I think, in shallow formats, he's probably just keep an eye on him. But I would guess there's better second base options to start the season. I think if you're at all interested, pick him up, put him on your bench. But I don't know. I'm encouraged actually by the early goings.
All right, and the last stop on the post-hype sleeper train is a guy who's had success in the major leagues before, and that is Spencer Torkelson. We teased talking about him earlier in the show. Spencer Torkelson had an incredible spring. He forced his way into the lineup. He was going to be an afterthought for Detroit. That's why they were moving Colt Keith over to first base. But Spencer Torkelson, great spring, opening day, homers, walks 4 times. And then in the second game of the season, he stole a base. Not known as fleet of foot, Spencer Torkelson, Josh. You got any interest?
Yeah, I do actually. I picked him up today. It's my first baseman collection to add with Manzardo. No, but perhaps I would say the most impressive thing he did on opening day was the 4 walks. As a guy that's been pretty chase heavy during the early goings of his career. And he did homer, and on the heels of a white hot spring, I think, yeah, I'm gonna add him and see where this goes for sure. And as we were saying, the first base position is pretty weak outside of the first 5 up guys. So yeah, I think if you don't have Vlad or Freddie, Pete Alonso or Bryce Harper,
Madelson.
Madelson, I would definitely take a flyer on uh, Torkelson, Manzardo, Soderstrom, just to see where this goes. So, why not take a chance on upside?
Yeah, Spencer Torkelson, former number 1 overall pick in the draft for Detroit. Has been up and down. slow starts. Again, had that 31 homer season, but he's definitely interesting. You know, the talent is there. It's just can he put it together, right?
Mhm.
But you and I were talking before the show that it is the time of the season to pick up and see where things go. You know, overturn the back end of your roster, those, 20th, 21st, 22nd round draft picks, cycle through, see what hits and lands, and maybe you've got some tremendous value. You've picked up the league difference maker, in the
Yep.
very beginning of the season. But don't be afraid if those guys eventually do slow down. If you've juiced that proverbial orange, do
Mhm.
not be afraid to drop those guys for the next orange that requires juicing
Right.
later in the season. I have to ask because to me, I'm way more conservative than you are at this point of the year. How do you decide who's worth, giving a look on your team to?
Well, as you're saying, at the back of the draft is is a lot of like guys a lot of unknowns, a lot you're chasing upside. Maybe you had a couple of like panic picks that you're just like, I don't know what to pick, and then it auto drafts, or like somebody was in your queue and you're making up your mind and you couldn't get it together. So,
Definitely didn't have any of those panic picks. Definitely
yeah,
didn't.
inevitably you're gonna have most people are you're gonna have the back end of your roster, which is guys that you're not in love with. I don't dump. It's not just like a big churn. I think I have one or two spots, ideally just one, that I like to just churn, or like I'm just like a hawk at the box scores and just like seeing who's doing what. And I definitely start seeing trends with people, and also this early with spring training, like Spencer Torkelson, for example. He had a really hot spring. I know it's only been 2 games, but he's playing the Dodgers, and he's also showing what he was doing in the spring is translating. So and also he has the pedigree, and even more importantly, he's shown us in the majors that he's capable of hitting 31 home runs. So in some ways, he might be ahead of the pack in terms of Manzardo and Soderstrom, because in a way he's shown us his upside, and now he's showing us, maybe he's unlocking, a higher gear. So I tend to keep a lot of that kind of stuff in consideration when I'm looking at potential waiver wire pickups. I think it's the same thing with pitching. What kind of track record has this pitcher had? Or they, if it's a veteran pitcher, did they have a down season and now they're poised to have a bounce back season? If it's a young pitcher, does this pitcher have pedigree? What kind of pitcher are they? Are they known for strikeouts? And if so, are they unlocking the strikeouts with the ability to mitigate walks and hits? So I like to look for that kind of stuff. And primarily it's just by obsessively looking at box scores every day and then noticing trends. And then from those trends, I'll start doing research on, to who these players are and if they've, developed some new skills.
So, of all the guys we talked today, I want to ask you just one last thing before we wrap up. So, I'm going to leave off Christian Campbell because he was getting drafted. I'm going to leave off Hayden Birdsong because he doesn't have a job, so we know he's not a priority ad. Jackson Holiday and Gavin Williams were also guys that were generally drafted. So let's go with Austin Wells, Mackenzie Gore, Kyle Manzardo, Jack Leiter, and Spencer Torkelson, and Brett Beatty. So that's 6 names. Of those 6, who are your top 3, and list them in the priority order from top priority to least priority in terms of who you would add right now.
I'd add all of them. I'm
Well,
kidding.
you've added a good portion
Actually,
of them.
I've added 2 of them. So, priority, I'd take Mackenzie Gore first, just because you always need pitching, and if he's poised to take a step to maybe a number 2 starter, I would definitely want to get on that train ASAP. And then I would go kind of what I was saying. I would go Spencer Torkelson, just because we know a little bit more about him, his good side and his bad side. And I think, given what he's shown us so far, I would take a gamble on him making strides to better himself. And then I would go with Kyle Manzardo.
All right, so you heard that. It's Mackenzie Gore because he's a pitcher, Spencer Torkelson because he's shown it before, and Kyle Manzardo. And I will give the reason for Kyle Manzardo to be because I think he's got the talent, he's got the batting eye, and he plays for a pretty good team with a pretty good lineup. So I would agree with your order there, and then I'll put Jack Leiter fourth again because of pitching and job security. But again, keep an eye on Hayden Birdsong. Keep an eye on Austin Wells, Brett Beatty, maybe a little bit further down that list. But you never know. Former top prospect. So that does it for this episode. Next time, we'll talk about players who have raised eyebrows during the first week, maybe in a good, maybe in a bad way. We'll talk about any interesting lineup developments we've seen. And then we'll also talk about how to approach roster evaluation, which we kind of just touched on a little bit, but we'll go much more in depth next week. How to approach roster evaluation during the early part of the season. Please subscribe. We're available on all major podcast platforms. Give us a like, a 5-star rating, a kind review. We will read all of them. And if there's anything you want us to talk about, drop us a message. For Josh Day, I'm Eric Hendrickson saying, see you next week.
Bye, everybody.